People always get confused when it comes to nutrition. There's so much conflicting information out there, right? In this episode, Dr. Shawn Baker breaks down exactly why an animal-based diet approach helped him improve his digestion, reduce inflammation, and boost his energy in his late 40s. We also get into cholesterol, heart health, longevity, and the environmental arguments around eating meat. So the point is this: what you eat directly affects your performance, your mood, and your ability to stay lean and healthy all year round. This conversation, I really think, will make you think differently about all of that. Let's get into it. How you doing, Shawn? Anyway, man, it's great to have you on.
I'm doing well. It's a nice day here, and it's good to be able to talk to you.
I just wanted to see if you could give us a quick insight into, who you are and what you're all about, basically, Shawn.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, I'm a physician. I was trained as an orthopedic surgeon, so I spent a significant portion of my career, fixing broken people, replacing joints, doing sports medicine treatments, fixing tendons and ligaments and healing broken bones. And I did my time as a trauma surgeon during the Afghan conflict, and so that's kind of my sort of background. But I've always been, as you said, I've always been an athlete. I've competed in numerous sports. I'm still a competitive athlete today, even though I'm, in my mid 50s. So I've kind of always prized performance and fitness and health. I got really interested in nutrition about, 10 or 12 years ago. And I've been kind of on this nutritional learning journey ever since. And, I kind of found some things that, maybe don't align with what most people believe or think or have been taught, or what our sort of nutritional experts tell us. And so I've been playing with, what's known as a carnivore diet, which is the term that I actually kind of came up with when I wrote my book. And, we've just seen some really, really neat stuff happening with people that are kind of realizing that meat is it's not a bad food. It's actually a very healthy food to eat. And so that's been an interesting thing. And I've been out there, kind of trying to get that information out to as many people as possible. I think the overlying message or underlying main message I have is that, when it comes to health and nutrition and disease, we are not really focused in the right direction. I mean, we're seeing, this ever increasing push towards pharmaceuticals and drug for this, drug for that. Even in the midst of this pandemic, we're completely minimizing the impact of improving one's health, their host factors, in lieu of, let's just everybody take a drug. And so I have, with everything I do, I try to say, you need to focus on these things. We could literally completely turn the direction around with this chronic disease epidemic, which is only getting worse. It gets worse and worse every year. Instead, we are now kind of accepting it. We've got this body positivity, obesity is beautiful. And it's not to say these people should be shunned or denigrated in any way, but I mean, we should not glorify disease. I mean, we can accept that it happens and try to realize that people are dealing with that, but to sort of almost promote it. And then of course, the solution for that is just don't worry about your disease. We got a pill for that. You can just kind of continue on in your unhealthy ways and behaviors, and we'll just continue to medicate you. I think that is clearly the wrong message. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It sells well.
100%. Yeah,
a lot of money to be made in that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, because obviously, people being willing to change their nutrition, change their behaviors with food, change their lifestyle. Always the approach is, well, for the most part, is like, take this pill, right, Shawn? So talk us through your experience, real briefly with me as well. I actually, about a year ago, I was eating probably 60, 70% plants. I was still eating a decent amount of meat and good quality meat sources, but gut issues. Couldn't get to the bottom of it for years. Really frustrating as well, because, I've been fit, healthy, an athlete as well, competing at a high level and stuff like that. And yeah, that was the one issue that I couldn't shake off. Gut issues, skin issues as well. Long story short, removed, the more toxic kind of plants out of my diet. And now I eat animal-based. I don't eat, full carnivore like yourself, but it's been life-changing for me in terms of my energy, my mental clarity. Even my libido has shot up even more. But the most important thing was my gut health. And obviously, Shawn, you know how important gut health is. So it's been life-changing for me, and thanks to your information, I've just ordered your book now as well. I need to read your book, The Carnivore the carnivore diets. But yeah, I mean, it really shined the light on the fact that actually, when you kind of peel everything back and all the information we've got, meat is by far, hands down, not even in competition with anything else, the most nutrient dense food on the planet, right? So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick insight into your journey, mate, with your personal journey in terms of the way you eat now, and then maybe some of the stuff you've experienced with people that you've helped. I've seen some of your transformations, and in terms of people, just literally life-changing transformations with people. So
Yeah. Like you, I ate kind of a mixed diet for most of my life, and I'm, like I said, a very competitive, highly successful athlete. And somewhere in my, I guess, I'm in my mid 50s now. In my early 40s, I started to see that I was starting to develop, quote unquote, signs of aging. I was getting old, and I didn't really like that. My back was hurting. I wasn't sleeping well. My blood pressure was going up. I probably was becoming pre-diabetic, in fact. All those things were going on. And so I took it upon myself to start looking into nutrition because I was already exercising. It wasn't like I was, just sitting on the couch. I was training extremely hard. I actually, in that condition, I actually managed to win a world championship in Highland Games, putting on a kilt, Scottish kilt, and throwing all this stuff around. And so I was performing still at a high level and training that way. But the nutrition part of it, I really wasn't focusing on. I ate plenty of protein, I ate plenty of meat, I ate plenty of food. I didn't eat a lot of junk, but despite that, I was still seeing these issues going on. And so I went on this journey, and I went through all different types of dietary variations and experiments and saw what worked the best. I did try the low fat, mostly vegetable type of approach, which many people are advocates of. And yes, indeed, I did lose weight, but I was just miserable. I absolutely felt miserable. I was tired. I was hungry. I was cold. I was irritable. No one wanted to be around me. The nurses at the hospital were like, "We much like the fat Dr. Baker, way better, because you're kind of being an ass." And it was true. And so I started to shift my focus, and I started including some more fat in the diet and more animal foods. And eventually, after doing low carb stuff for several years, I stumbled across a group of people that were doing this all meat crazy carnivore meat based diet. They called it a zero carb diet. And I thought it was bizarre. I thought it was weird. I thought it was crazy. It seemed, but it was interesting. And so I kind of dug and delved more into it, and kind of questioned some of these folks, and kept an open mind. And after about 6 months of kind of observing this, I said, well, let me just try it. And so I tried it, for a couple of days, and I was like, well, that's not bad. I kind of like steak and eggs. It's pretty good. I don't mind bacon and that type of stuff. And so that's what got me into it. And then, I kept going back to that and going longer and longer. And eventually I got to where I did it for a full month. And at the end of the month, throughout the month, I was like really impressed at how good I felt. I had things that had really kind of bothered me. And the digestive part was one of the first things I noticed. Before, I had digestion, which I thought was normal human digestion. A little bit of bloating, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then that all went away 100% completely. And it was like I didn't even notice I had eaten food anymore. There was no perception of digestion whatsoever. That was eye-opening to me. And so, when the 30 days were over, I went back to my more mixed omnivorous diet, and I immediately started to feel bad. Everything that had gone away immediately came back. So at that point, I made a decision that, I'm going to go continue doing this for a longer period of time. And then it went to 60 days, and then 3 months, and 6 months, and a year. And I remember my girlfriend at the time goes, "How long are you going to do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm only going to do it for a year." Then I got to 2 years and 3 years and so on and so forth. Wow. And so now I'm about 5 years into this. And that was my journey. And then so along the way, I was on social media talking about this stuff. And it was kind of a joke, hey, aren't you're going to die of a heart attack. You're going to, you're going to get scurvy because you're not eating vitamin C enough, and you're going to have, your colon's going to die because you don't have any fiber in there. And of course, none of those things happened. And for whatever reason, I inspired a bunch of other people to try it. And so we actually did a kind of an organized sort of experiment. We did a 90-day trial, and we had I think 100 people that had volunteered to go for 90 days. And we recorded everything. We recorded, as much information as we could from those people. And, with basically without exception, every one of them had tremendously good results. And they lost on average something like 30 pounds in 90 days, and 8 inches off their weight, or 8 centimeters off their waist. And their resting heart rate went down, and all the subjective markers. How do you feel? How's your sleep? How's your libido? How's your digestion? How's your skin, on and on? Everything got better tremendously. So I said, well, there's something really here. And so, I continued on this path, eventually formed a company with somebody else who had been affected by this. And we named this company MeatRx, meat is medicine, basically. And then we developed this huge community and we've got literally thousands and thousands of people now that have all seen similar results, like people that have, literally lifelong diseases, things like multiple sclerosis and, certainly diabetes and obesity and arthritis and back pain and some of the mental health disorders, bipolar disorder, anxiety, PTSD. I mean, just about everything you can think of that's chronic in nature. I've seen at least someone get dramatically better by using this. And so that is kind of where we were now. There's kind of an evolution in where we're going. We're seeing some patterns starting to emerge that, certain people, whether it's based on their age or their sex or maybe their ethnicity or where they're located in the world or what their lifestyle is like, seem to tolerate things better than others when we're talking about things in addition to meat. Certain people have different requirements, and so we're trying to figure that out. So that's kind of that's where we're headed at this point, because we want to make it as accessible as everybody. First, I'm fairly convinced that a carnivore diet as an elimination diet is very effective for just a tremendously high number of people for a high number of diseases and issues. Not everybody needs to do it, and not everybody wants to do it. And so we want to figure out what works, with the least restriction as possible, I suppose, and the thing that makes it more sustainable. Now, some people are just completely happy just eating nothing but, I got a guy that, he eats ground beef and bacon every meal, every day. He's been doing it for 3 years, and he's as happy as can be. Doesn't care, doesn't want to change anything, and it's fine. He's doing great. And there's other people that, they're happy to, add in a piece of fruit or something like that, or an avocado. And we're just trying to figure out what's going to work for them.
So, yeah, that's the deal right now.
By the way, click the link in the show notes to enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's awesome. I've seen, on your page and stuff, some of the, just some of the stuff you post with, the text and stuff that people have sent you. It's just unbelievable, right? Because as you say, with all the immune, and that's another kind of thing we're facing now, right? With chronic disease is the obesity epidemic, yes, heart disease, and I believe like immune issues now are kind of just behind that, right? So like immune illness is flying up, right, on a global scale. So, mate, that was really good for clearing that up. I wanted to ask you in terms of like me, because this is an issue I get, Shawn, right, with clients. And funny thing is, even myself, right? So I was eating a decent amount of, say, good quality grass-fed red meat anyway, right, prior to about a year ago when I transitioned more into animal-based. So now I just eat some fruit. I don't eat any vegetables. I just eat fruit, berries, avocado. Red meat, I eat offal as well, so I get a decent amount of kind of beef liver in and whatnot, and I have some bone broth here in there, so it's quite balanced. But I was always worried, even me in my head, I was worried about like red meat. I had this thing in my head, like maybe not more than 3 or 4 times you shouldn't eat it, because I just didn't know what was going on in my head personally. Because the bottom line is like, anyway, I wanted to ask you, because I have with clients, for example, I've had, I'm a transformation coach, so I was a personal trainer for years. But now my business is online and I help people a lot with nutrition now, right? So some of my clients, Shawn, they've they've been getting great results. They've got leaner. They feel so much better, energy levels, they're stronger, everything else. Then they go to the doctors and have a checkup. And the doctor, I'm sure you've heard this many a times, the doctor will say to them, your cholesterol levels are really, really high. You got to be very careful. And then they'll come to me and they'll say, look, I'm going to have to cut meat out. I'm going to have to reduce my eggs and, egg yolks and stuff like that. And I'll try and communicate to them, but the bottom line is, man, I wanted to ask you, saturated fat, cholesterol, these things that, a lot of us are conditioned to still think are bad. Talk to us about that a bit, Shawn, if you don't mind, because it's a bit of a frustration of mine, you know?
Yeah. I mean, so I think the first thing is when we sort of look at these sort of various biomarkers and their associations with diseases, we have to remember that we don't unequivocally know that the relationships are always, the associations always hold true in every single population. Like you said, these people, they get, so if we look at, I don't think health moves in disparate ways. I think you get healthy or you don't get healthy. You get sicker. As you get sicker, we see people's body compositions where they replace lean mass with fat tissue. They become fatter. Their inflammatory markers usually increase. Their blood glucose control gets worse. Their triglycerides may elevate. They may see fat deposition in their organs, fatty liver disease, fatty pancreas disease, fat within the muscle tissue. Blood pressure may go up, and then all the clinical symptoms. They're tired, they're fatigued, their skin looks blotchy, or their teeth are having problems. All these things go in the same direction, right? It's rarely to see somebody that's perfectly healthy with one aspect and everything else is garbage. There's usually a consistent pattern. And so when I see people that start out, maybe 50 kilos overweight and they're pre-diabetic or diabetic and they're depressed and their joints hurt and their blood glucose control is poor and everything, and the blood pressure is high and everything gets better, all of it gets better, and the only thing that goes the other way is cholesterol, then you have to ask yourself, in that particular situation, is that cholesterol really a problem like we think it is? Are you going to tell me you do better as a big fat guy with poor blood glucose and inflammation, high blood pressure for heart disease than you would as a lean guy with none of that stuff, and the only difference is your LDL cholesterol? I find that hard to believe just from a plausibility standpoint, when we talk about disease. But I think that, we're coming to find out that, and many physicians still are, 3 decades behind, that, LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol are really imprecise and maybe not even that strong of markers for predicting cardiovascular disease. Even though there's a lot of associational data going back many years, it shows that we're seeing more and more that there's subfractions and there's different sort of scenarios, whether the cholesterol is oxidized or not oxidized, the particle size. You want to know things like advanced lipoprotein testing, where you can look at the insulin resistance scores and things like that. I really like to, because we see people with very high cholesterol, but when you actually examine their arteries, you look at their neck or you look at their heart, they're pristine typically. And so why do we have this variation there? It should be consistent across the board. And so is there a population of people that are healthy that can have high cholesterol? I think there is. I think that's probably likely to be seen. There's some studies I know that at least there's one study that's looking at that hasn't been finished yet, but it's in works to look at people with very high cholesterol and see what happens to their vessels. We know that the vast majority of people that have heart attacks don't have high cholesterol. They have normal to low cholesterol. But there are people that have a high cholesterol too. So, you can have a heart attack at any level of cholesterol. It doesn't really matter. So like I said, I don't think you should ignore cholesterol. In certain situations, it's probably very problematic. I think it's part of the, I look at it like this, if I'm going to build a fire, I need at least 3 ingredients. I need something to burn, so wood. I need an environment, oxygen, so air, and then I need fuel, so fire. So there's 3 ingredients. And if I don't have all 3 of those, I can put, wood on the ground all day long. If there's no oxygen or spark, it's never going to turn into a fire. And so I think the same thing with cholesterol. If you don't have those underlying issues, and some of those issues would be vascular damage, endothelial damage, then you're not going to see cholesterol being deposited. And then the environment might be, do we have chronic inflammation or hyperglycemia or some of those things? There was a recent study looking at the Women's Health Study, looking at something like 50,000 people, and they showed that the number one predictor for cardiovascular disease, was at a rate of, an odds ratio of 8 or 800% increase was diabetes, or I think it might have been 10,000%. LDL cholesterol in that same study showed about a 37% increase. So you've got 1,000% increase in risk versus a 38% increase in risk, which is really kind of minimal, quite honestly. So I just, I think when anybody has that information, your doctor should at least look for more information, because you can plug in something as simple as a MESA calculator, multi-ethnicity study on atherosclerosis, MESA calculator. You can plug in your numbers and you can see what your risk is. Like for mine, for instance, well, it's kind of funny. I checked my cholesterol, well, I don't know, a month ago. My total cholesterol was 237 milligrams per deciliter, US numbers. And when I plugged in all my stuff into the MESA calculator, my risk for having a cardiovascular event in the next 10 years was 2%. If I could take my cholesterol and bring it all the way down to 100 and make the vegan doctor super happy, my risk would go from 2.2% to like 1.6%. So it's like a 6.60% difference.
Yeah.
It's like, is it worth it to me? The other thing that would happen is my HDL would drop if I did that. So it would further make that not that worthwhile. And then again, I talk about most of these studies when we're looking at cholesterol, we're worried about cardiovascular disease. And while it's true, cardiovascular disease is the disease that kills most people or kills the most number of people. You're going to die of something at some point. If you don't die of cardiovascular disease, you're going to die of cancer. If you don't die of cancer, you're going to die of, an infection or violent crime or suicide or, any other, some neurodegenerative disease or any of those things. And so who's to say what you're going to die of or what you even want to die? I mean, if it was up to me, drop dead of a heart attack sounds a hell of a lot better than, dying of friggin', lung cancer or something like that. So, I mean, it's one of those things where I look at it, all-cause mortality, because when you look at all-cause mortality curves, there's a great study out of Korea published in 2019, looking at 12 million people. This is one of the largest studies ever been done. And they showed that, there was a very nice J-shaped curve at cholesterol. When your cholesterol was very, very low, like below 120 total cholesterol, the odds of you dying of anything was something like 250% higher. And then when it got down to 210 to 240, it was the lowest it was at. And then as it went up towards 300, it increased a little bit, but maybe 30%. So I think, like I said, if your goal is to live, then I'm not convinced that you have to necessarily have the cholesterol as low as possible. I think there's other things that matter. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, I'm going to say I don't know what makes people live longer. I really don't. Because I don't think anyone knows. And I think if you use that as your operating framework, then the other thing is what other worthy goals can I have? Well, I would say, why don't we work on quality of life? Why don't we feel good? Why don't we enjoy the time we have on earth, however long it may be, not be burdened with disease, function well, feel well? And if that's our goal, then perhaps our recommendations look very differently. And as you pointed out yourself, if you're running around with gut pain all the time, or your friends are obese and have pain and that goes away, to me, I think that's a worthy goal. And I think that's probably all we're able to do with and to actually say with any confidence. I mean, I know if I've got a patient that is diabetic taking medications and I can make them so they don't need to take any medication anymore, that's a win. That's clear. That's not speculating what you're going to die of in 30 years, which is always, I mean, it's like astrology as far as I'm concerned.
100%. I actually had that with a client as well. He was pre-diabetic, and then obviously as he got leaner, healthier, prioritized the important things, such as just eating more whole foods, getting good sleep and all the rest of it. And obviously, just training properly and stuff like that. Obviously he then, he was no longer pre-diabetic, those markers improved drastically, but then obviously his cholesterol, was a little bit higher, whatever. So yeah, taking nothing away from doctors as well. I wanted to put that out there. I'm definitely not a doctor, right? But just I wanted to clear that up because I think it's an important thing for people to know that it's actually context, right, Shawn? I think that's what you're trying to say. There's a lot of context, I guess, contextual variance or whatever from person to person, and it's a trade-off to how healthy you are in general, right? Like you said at the start, you're either going one way, you're getting healthier, you're feeling better, you'll notice that as well because of how you feel, how you perform, and how you look, or you're not really. So yeah, I like the way you summed that up. So when it comes to vegetables, Shawn, obviously I still get, when I say to people, I don't eat vegetables anymore, they're like, wow, someone said to me recently, wow, I'm really shocked about that. I thought you would have eaten your veggies, And I was like, yeah, I used to eat I used to be the guy, Shawn, who would eat like bowls of broccoli and cauliflower, loads of olive oil just on its own, you know. But yeah, nowadays, because I don't, vegetables. You talked about vitamin C, and you've talked about this many a times. I've looked into lots of your research and the studies you've shared. Vitamin C, obviously, fiber, antioxidants. They're the three things that I get a bit of pushback on myself. You need those things in your diet. You know, you need to have vegetables to get those things in. Talk us through the vegetable thing, if you don't mind, Shawn. I'm sure you get a lot of people asking you about this. Oh, you don't eat any vegetables. You know, you're gonna die early. You're gonna die young.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, we have this sort of belief that vegetables are the healthiest thing we can possibly eat, and we need to eat loads of them. And as long as we're eating lots of vegetables, we're going to have tremendous health. And in reality, we see a lot of people that eat a lot of vegetables, and they end up having some significant health challenges. Now, I will say that I think vegetables and fruits and vegetables are a better food choice than much of what you find in the grocery store. Most of the, all the ultra processed food, all the foods with all these, highly new ingredients. Anytime we're eating soybean oil and high fructose corn syrup and artificial flavors and coloring, I don't think that's a good idea, quite honestly, or at least not having that in great quantities in the diet. And so if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, usually it means two things. Usually it means, number one, you care about your health, and so you don't eat the junk food. And number two, it often means you're fairly wealthy. At least certainly in Western countries, because fruits and vegetables tend to be more expensive, particularly if you're eating the organic ones, than the chips and crap, and so anytime you look at populations that are eating more fruits and vegetables, you're saying, I'm looking at people that care about their health, that have more money. And so automatically you've now just put them in a more favorable light, and I think that's something that, they try to correct for that with multivariate analysis, but I don't think they necessarily do. The correction is whatever they think it might be. They'll fudge the numbers anyway. We think socioeconomic status is worth 20%, so we're going to, but it could be 50%. And it may, we don't really know that thing with the multivariate analysis, quite honestly. So I don't necessarily think fruits or vegetables are necessarily bad or harmful for people, but I will say there are people in which it does cause harm. And that's just the reality of the observation. This is why you have practicing clinicians that make observations in the field. And you can't just discount that and say, well, I've got 5,000 people that told me when they were eating, whatever vegetables, they had some kind of digestive problem, or they had some sort of issue. And when they removed it, it went away, and it goes away reliably. It comes back every time I reintroduce it. So you have to at least acknowledge that that's going on. Now, why that may be, I think there's some evidence that our gut function has been compromised, and it's getting worse, as a population, as individuals over the last several decades, as our food quality has gotten lower and lower and lower, and we're eating more and more things which I don't think are necessarily things we are well adapted to eating. So we have a compromised gut, and now this compromised gut, which in maybe decades past could have easily handled asparagus and broccoli, now for some people it just doesn't even handle that anymore. And so I do think that meat is a superior food. I think it's clear that it's easier on our gut for sure for most people. The way, even if you look at the way our anatomy is set up, I mean, we are set up primarily as a protein and fat eating species. I mean, we do have the capacity to eat carbohydrates, and fiber is something that we can derive a small amount of caloric nutrition from, but is certainly not our priority. If we look at, say for instance, for fiber, our capacity to ferment and digest fiber from a comparative anatomy standpoint, if we look at, like, say, a chimpanzee or a gorilla, other primates, they have something like 50 to 60% of their gut is dedicated to fermenting and breaking down fiber. The human gut only has about 15 to maybe 18% of our gut dedicated to that. That's identical to what a cat or a dog has, pretty much. They're both in that 15 to 18% range. So, our diet probably could mimic that of a cat or a dog. And if we ask certainly what cats eat, they're going to be heavily animal based. Cats, surprisingly, we would all agree a cat's a carnivore. I don't think anyone out there would disagree with that. However, cats eat cat food that's dry cat food, and a lot of it has grains and stuff like that, and they can process up to something like a diet of 60% carbohydrate. Cats can actually eat a 60% carbohydrate based diet and still survive, even though they're carnivores. And so, funnily enough, human beings are often eating a 60% carbohydrate grain-based diet, even though we probably are what I would call facultative carnivores. I mean, we are opportunistic omnivores, meaning to say we'll eat whatever the hell we can find. And if Twinkies would have grown on a tree 100,000 years ago, you can be damn sure humans would have been eating them. But, what we could get and what was available to us, particularly as we evolved, was clearly a lot of meat. I mean, that's if you think about how humans evolved and spread out across the globe, if the argument is we rose somewhere in maybe Eastern Africa or some part of Africa, it always goes back and forth. And then we kind of, as we kind of became Homo erectus, they were the first ones to kind of leave Africa, we believe. They crossed Southern Europe and Asia, and then eventually we kind of came back and mixed in Europe, and then we kind of went from Asia across the land bridge to North America, South America, and eventually we colonized the Australia and the Pacific Islands. We survived, and we are the most diverse species on the planet as far as geography. And the only reason we could do that is not because we had to eat some superberry, because there's no superberry that grows in all those places. The only thing that you can find food-wise in all of those different places throughout the world are animal foods. There's some kind of meat. And incidentally, humans, if you go outside and look around, there's pretty much not a single animal that you can't eat. I mean, every animal is on the menu. But something like 98, 99% of all plants on the planet are not edible. They will either kill you or make you very sick. So, I mean, it's one of those things you can't make the argument that we're requiring to eat plants if that plant or those plants don't grow everywhere. I mean, the only plant I think micro in most places might be grass. You can probably find grass most places in the world, but I would, you can't eat it.
Yeah, unless you're a dog. Yeah,
well, yeah.
It makes it even makes dogs sick.
Yeah, the dogs even get sick on that. So I mean, I think it's if you just kind of look at it from just a common sense macroscopic view, and discount some of the nutritional science, which I think is just, unfortunately, I think our nutrition science is not very scientific. I mean, I know there's scientists and PhDs and people that dedicate their lives to that, but it's just almost impossible to do good medical or nutritional research in people and make valid claims about longevity and health outcomes. I just don't think we can really do that.
Yeah, 100%. And thanks for clearing that up as well in terms of fruit and vegetables not being necessarily demonized. I didn't want to come on here and kind of, demonize vegetables and fruit. It's just to make people aware of the fact that, animal-based foods, which we're going to just delve a bit deeper into now quickly, are actually the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat, all in all, providing, it's good quality. So fruit and vegetables, I've got lots of clients who do really, really well. Their gut's totally fine eating vegetables and fruit, fills them up more because of the fiber on top of the protein, and they're doing really, really well. So like I said, there's so much individual variance as well, Shawn, right? From person to person, like you said, when it comes to diet and metabolism, right? So that's why it's kind of, you got to, in a sense, figure things out for yourself. Like you said, you've been doing with clients, Shawn, as well, right? You're still trying to figure out, who does better, with some fruit in their diet or whatever, because sustainability is obviously, really important as well, as you touched on. So in terms of meat then, Shawn, just talk us through like the most kind of nutrient dense foods you would say, meat, especially, or animal-based foods that you have in your diet as a staple and that maybe you kind of recommend to people you work with.
Yeah, I think the first thing, it doesn't matter how nutrient dense a food is if no one's going to eat it. So you have to account for palatability, right? So I mean, I know a lot of people are big proponents of offal or organ meats, and they'll say, we need you to eat this much liver and this much kidney and this much thymus and brain and on and on and on. And so I certainly recognize that there are some unique concentrations of nutrients in these certain things. I personally don't eat much in the way of offal at all. I eat almost none, and I've been doing that for 5 years now. I've had it from time to time just to experiment to see if it makes a difference, and I've been underwhelmed at any effect that it's had on me in any way, and I've consistently found it not to be that tasty. So I tend not to eat it. I mean, I think that when it comes to nutrition in general, I think meat from a ruminant animal, this is a grazing animal with the four-chambered stomach like a cow or a sheep or some of the wild animals, elk, deer, bison, tend to be perhaps more nutritious, certainly more satiating. You know, I think again, if we go back to our historical or ancestral roots, when it came to hunting, you know, and I alluded to Homo erectus, well, they started hunting and they had a spear. I mean, that's all they had as their technology. And that's all they, quite honestly, that's all they really needed. They didn't need to develop any more technology. Technology is usually, you know, the mother of invention is necessity. And since they had spears and they had big, fat, juicy animals they could stick them in, they were good. They didn't need to develop anything. And so the evidence indicates that they ate a lot of, particularly these things called proboscideans. So these would be these elephants and mastodons and mammoths. That was their food of choice. They would kill them. And it wasn't hard for them to do it because elephants and they don't see humans as threats typically, or at least most of them didn't, particularly early on, because they're 100 times bigger than us, right? They're 12,000 pounds, and a human is 150 pounds, and so when you go back to hunting, you would have selected those big animals, and so you're thinking about, well, what about like chicken or something like that? Well, chicken's a bird. How hard is it to kill a bird with a spear? And how much work do you have to do when, relative to killing a mammoth for how much meat you can get? So it's kind of an optimal foraging or hunting strategy. If I have to spend 3 hours killing and butchering an elephant, and I can get 4 million calories or whatever it's going to be, would I choose that, or would I want to? How long would it take me to get the equivalent in chicken? I mean, it would probably take me 3 years to chase all those chickens down and kill them. And so that's what I think there's pretty clear evidence that's what humans selected to do and preference to do. And so I think our evolution was based upon that. So ruminant meat, fattier meat, probably, I think, again, in the absence of a lot of carbohydrate, you need to get energy from somewhere. There's a nice paper that Mickey Bendor and Rob, I can't remember the other Rob Barker or something out of Tel Aviv, just published last year looking at, human evolution. And so they're projecting around 80,000 years ago, our supply of these big giant animals started to dry up for whatever reason. Many people will point to overhunting, but because of that, we then were forced to select smaller animals because that was all that was left. And so because of that, we had to evolve our hunting techniques. And so range technology, atlatls and bow and arrows and things we could projectile started to develop. And so now we've got, we're chasing these smaller animals around. There's not as much fat. It's harder to get as much energy. We still had, the protein was still there, but the energy was lacking. And so then we started to turn towards more of our calories coming from plant sources. And then eventually that culminated in kind of the development of agriculture around 10, 12,000 years ago. And unfortunately for the human species, well, I guess it depends how you are. I mean, that allowed the development of civilization as we know it. But the negatives to that were, we took a big hit individually from our individual health. I mean, our brains actually shrunk by about 200 cc's. Our stature, we became about 6 inches shorter. Our dental health got worse. Our bone structure got weaker. We lost muscle. So, I mean, we became a more frail species and weaker species, despite the fact that we've landed a man on the moon and all this great stuff that civilization and collective intelligence has allowed us to do. But individually, we became compromised, compared to what we were, maybe 125,000 years ago.
Makes sense. Just a couple more things I wanted to clear up with you quickly, Shawn. And the other one was like the environment thing. It's another thing I'll be honest, I find it quite hard to convey because, we've got so much propaganda out there, right, Shawn? Mm-hmm. As you've probably seen firsthand, right? When it comes to, the vegan community and plant-based and stuff like that. And then obviously with the environment debate as well. Talk us through that, because I know it's a very complex thing to talk about, but if you wouldn't mind just giving us your insight on, cows, the worst thing for the environment, you got to stop eating them. Again, context.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a very, I think this has been a very important argument that the plant-based community has co-opted, because they realize they're not selling it on the health, because most people look at these vegans and they see that many of them look pretty sketchy as far as health goes. I mean, there's exceptions, but most of them don't look all that healthy. We see that, from an ethical standpoint, that's pretty easy to debunk the fact that, hey, look, I mean, there's lots of animals that are dying in your food too. And the environmental aspect is their latest argument. And they are getting now the support of major corporations and industry because they're realizing that if they can convert people to an alternative protein source, we see this at some of these, even these big meat companies are rebranding themselves as protein companies. And they are sort of adopting this. We can turn peas or soybeans into meat, quote unquote meat, and we can tell people it's better for the environment and better for your health and on, the typical talking points. But the important point is we can make a hell of a lot more money than selling people beef, because beef costs a lot of money to raise. And we got to pay the ranchers, and it's hard to automate and those types of things. And we've already sort of maxed out what we can do in some degrees with that. And we can, the scalability and the profitability margin on these synthetic and alternative sources of protein are much, much higher. So this is why we're seeing these arguments being played out in the media and the press, and in celebrities and in school and stuff like that are being pushed very hard. So you got to remember the reason behind it. It's not because everybody wants to go vegan. They could care less. They want to make a lot of money off your back, and they don't really care about your health. Anybody who's not completely naive realizes that corporations don't care about people's health. They care about profits. That's all they care about, and that's what drives their strategies. Now, they might paint it a certain way and pretend and masquerade and greenwash and health wash things just to act like they pretend to care, but they actually don't really. But as far as the environmental stuff, we often hear that, if you give up meat, you can save the planet from overheating because of climate change and all this stuff. And then they'll point to data from 2006, a study called Livestock's Long Shadow, in which they depicted, cows being responsible, animal agriculture being responsible for 14% of all greenhouse gases worldwide. And, then they'll point to the transportation sector, and it's also around 14%. And they'll say, "My God, it's more than cows and planes and boats and trains and all this stuff combined. By God, you should just give up meat." So what they don't tell you is that, first of all, that 14% number looks very different depending upon what parts of the world you're in. So when they use a global number, like for instance, in the United States, where I live, and in Australia, it's probably not too dissimilar. In the United States, cows are responsible for 2% of our greenhouse gases. This comes straight from the Environmental Protection Agency. It's very solid numbers. It's been that way for decades. The numbers are always pretty consistent. Gas, fossil fuels, and the industries that use fossil fuels, transportation industry, and energy sectors, they make up 80% of our greenhouse gases. And so you're trying to say that 2%, me cutting back meat in the United States is going to make a 2% difference. In fact, I just talked with Frank Mittelohner, who's he's a greenhouse gas expert, PhD from UC Davis. And he basically says that, if every American in the United States were to go completely vegan and give up all of the meat, and we got rid of all the cows, we'd have to kill all the cows, all 93 million cows, and, 9 million dairy cows and 9 million horses and 170 million cats and dogs. If we got rid of all of that and all of us gave up meat, the difference would only be a 2% reduction in our greenhouse gases in the United States. So it's almost pitiful. It's ridiculous. But they're going to play up these 14% numbers. And the reason it's so high is because most countries don't have much in the way of a transportation sector. There's not a lot of cars and highways and traffic in the middle of Namibia. They've got cattle. So these numbers are higher because most of the countries are not developed. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and you understand where these numbers are actually coming from. Most of us are aware of, China is putting out a tremendous amount of greenhouse gases. They're the world leader in greenhouse gas emissions. I think India is right up there, and then the U.S. puts out a lot per capita because we're not very environmentally efficient, I suppose. Although we've shown reductions like no one else has in the last few years. So that argument to me is not particularly compelling. The argument about the greenhouse, the Amazon rainforest is burning. There's a lot of nuance into that. But the bottom line, in the United States, about 0.5% of our beef comes from Brazil. 99.5% of the beef in the United States is not coming from Brazil. Has no impact on the Amazon rainforest. And why the forest is being cut down. Number one, they need the wood. So lumber. The first reason they cut it down is to get the wood, right? Wood is valuable for the construction industry. And then they want to maybe plant other products in there. They'll plant in coffee and fruits and vegetables and all these foods, and some soybeans for sure. And the soy is being first converted into human edible soybean oil. That's what they do. They press it for oil first, and then the leftover amounts are being shipped overseas, typically to China, to feed their pigs. The cattle are not eating the soybeans. They're not the reason. Now what they do is, now they've cut down this forest, and they'll put cattle on there now to graze it. They kicked them out of the sugarcane producing country, because before they were in the Cerrado grazing, down south where the sugar canes were. And then they said, well, we need to grow a lot of sugar, so we're going to move the cows somewhere else. So let's stick them in the Amazon. So it's much more complicated. The arguments around water, always see, well, if you eat 1 kilogram of beef, it takes 27 swimming pools of water to produce. This is some crazy number like that. And what's actually occurring is that something like 98% of the water, depending on what part of the world you're in, is coming from rain. I mean, this is what they're calculating. So rain falls on the ground, falls on the grass, the cows eat the grass, therefore they took that water, right? Mm-hmm. The rain was going to fall regardless. It's not like the cows are out there doing a rain dance, making it fall. The rain rains regardless. So, but they still count that in their calculation. That's like 98% of the water footprint. So, I mean, when you look at just blue water, that's irrigation water that came from an aquifer, the numbers look much, much different, but they don't want to tell you that. And then if we start comparing actual nutrients, if we look at lettuce, water consumption based on grams of protein, or something, usable high quality nutrients, zinc or lysine, then it's not even a contest. And then cows even look super environmentally friendly. And then that's not even to go to some of the things we do, as far as, regenerative style agriculture, which many people are doing, has tremendous benefit for restoring the soil or for restoring the biodiversity. But there's other things that are being done. Australia is one of the groups that pioneered this. There's additives you feed cattle, and they can almost dramatically eliminate the methane production if we're worried about methane. And I think methane is overblown anyway. But if we're still going to say that's a problem, you can cut out the methane production from feed additives, any methane in the manure. You can suck the methane out of that using an anaerobic digester and convert that into biodiesel or fuel. The cars can drive around, or you heat your home or something like that. So there are solutions that don't involve making everyone a malnourished vegan. This is just, again, this whole environmental argument is, hey, look, we see a market opportunity. We were projecting that the alternative meat or protein market is going to be 150 billion, 400 billion by the year 2040, 2050. And so these companies are aggressively trying to get into that space, and they're marketing, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars, paying people to recycle their thing and trying to convince you that, the only thing you can do to save the planet is give up beef. Don't turn your air conditioner down 2 degrees. Just stop eating meat. Or so. It's just nonsense. But again, it's propaganda. Whoever wields the microphone, whoever has the loudest voice, whoever owns the media, is going to own the message. And unfortunately, people don't know better, and they're swayed by this. The nice thing about it, from a health standpoint, is you can look in the damn mirror. I mean, the climate change argument is tough for me to say, because I look out the window and it's 75 degrees and sunny and looks great. Is it climate change? I don't know. I mean, I have to have somebody tell me if it's changing or not. Yeah. But with regard to my own health, I can literally walk in the mirror, wake up and say, how do I feel? What do I look like? So that argument is for me very easy, because most people can intuitively tell that, but I can't tell you what's going on with the weather or the climate. I'm not, aside from the fact that I've been to many ranches and talked with many ranches, and I've seen how they treat their animals, most people have no idea what's going on with regard to ethics. They're just like, they're seeing some, cowspiracy, or watch Dominion movie, these, vegans, and then people go, oh my God, that's what everybody does. But if you don't actually go talk to the people that raise your food and actually understand that, you're never going to know. Or you're going to see some propaganda film. So yeah, that's the deal with that stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, and obviously you did share recently that it can actually be good for the environment if you're getting good quality pasture raised. As you said, you obviously you most likely know the people that produce your where you get your meat from and stuff like that. People who own the farms, and it's actually some research now, I think, to show as well that it actually can be good for the environment, right? Because it's like its own little ecosystem. Is that correct? Like, obviously, again, is context, but that can be true.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are ranchers all over the world that are demonstrating that every day, that when they graze and pasture animals in a certain way, it 100% captures carbon. They are net carbon negative. They are increasing biodiversity. The birds come back, the bees come back, the wild animals come back, the grasslands come back. The animals are not exposed to. There's no herbicides or pesticides being used. The soil's not running off. On and on and on. And and the animals are in those situations often more productive. They can run multiple species in the same area of land, so they can conserve land. They don't need to provide all these extra inputs. So it's not only better for the environment, but it's often more financially lucrative for the ranchers themselves once they get up to speed and running. But it may take a couple of years to kind of turn things around. So that's one of the things that hopefully we'll see more support on a legislative way, so these people can get into this a little more easily.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, Shawn, is really, really funny, by the way. The stuff that you share on your pages, I find it hilarious, right? It's so funny, man. So I wanted to ask you how you deal with the pushback you get from, the vegan community and stuff like that. Obviously, it's clear how you handle it, right? You laugh, you have a laugh or cry, right? And like I said, some of the stuff you share is so entertaining. But yeah, you must get a hell of a lot of abuse and pushback. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle it. I can't imagine. Would you be able to explain to us some of the pushback you get, some of the people attacking you, and how you handle that?
Well, I first of all, I'll say 99% of the feedback I get is positive. I have so many people telling me, thank you for what you're doing, and thank you, you've changed my life, and you've made a big difference in my health and all that stuff. And I get a lot of physicians, same thing. But there are, some people that'll come in there and say, first of all, we think you smell bad, you're ugly, you're fat, you're stupid, there's some stupid insult, and we can't wait for you to have a heart attack, and on and on and on. And, we hope your soul roasts in hell, and we hope your family dies. And I mean, it's just nonsense. And, and then sometimes I'll get just absolute nonsense, and sometimes I'll just turn it around and use it as a humorous post. I say, look what this knucklehead said. And, and it's just, some of them are doing it just for attention. Other people tell me they're gonna find me in a dark alley and beat me to a pulp, and say, okay, come on, bring it on.
I don't want to see you in a dark alley, mate.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, but I mean, that stuff doesn't bother me. But I'll tell you what does kind of bother me. This is something, I had been on Twitter for about 6 years, and my account was suspended the other day. And the reason they gave me was complete nonsense. It was like, you had a video from 2019 that had music in it that was copyrighted, so we're going to suspend your account permanently. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, the real reason is the message I've been putting out is counter to whatever kind of narrative they want to present there. And I think that is more disturbing. I don't care about the criticism. I'm happy to have criticism. I think we should have criticism.
Yeah, if you're doing it right.
I welcome that, and you should be able to refute it. If what you say it can stand on its own and has merit, then you'll be able to defend that, and you'll be able to demonstrate with results, facts, or whatever, which I generally am able to do. But when someone is like, well, we're not going to allow you to have a voice, I think this is a very serious topic, and I think this is something that we're seeing this happen throughout the world like no other time. Most of this is again around this COVID stuff, but I mean, we're seeing that trickle down to all aspects of, what your thoughts are on politics or even health now. And I think that's a grave disservice, because I will tell you that, there is no settled science on nutrition at this point, as far as I'm concerned. And I think most people would agree with that, but there are people that I don't know why. I mean, I don't understand the reason why you would want to not have discourse or debate, even if it's contentious, even if it's nasty. I think we should be able to have that. I'm happy to, like I said, I would be upset if sort of my vegan critics were silenced and not allowed to talk. I would literally would be, I would be upset about that if someone was told, hey, we don't like your voice. I think that is, like I said, that is, again, I know this is not the topic of the show, but I think if we're going to live in a free society or have a free society, freedom of speech is, obviously paramount. It has to be there. And I think that's under threat right now. And Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway,
But anyway, the haters I laugh at typically. It's usually, I've been through, I mean, gosh, I mean, I've been punched in the face. My head's been kicked in playing rugby. I've been in the middle of combat zones. I've had bad things that I've been exposed to, and some moron on a keyboard who's anonymous typing out some stupid sentence has little meaning to me whatsoever. And I don't really, if I can use it in a humorous way, that's about the only time I'll pay attention to it.
Exactly. And just to clarify what I said at the beginning, right? Obviously, you're an orthopedic surgeon, in Bagram Air Base, if I got that right, out in Afghan, 600, I read something like 600 surgeries in that one base alone, if I've got that right, in terms of frontline trauma. So yeah, some of the stuff you've seen, like you said, a keyboard warrior is not really going to phase you. So mate, just real quick, what would you say to people? Because you're almost 56 years old. Have I got that right, Shawn?
55. I'm about to turn 55. So
you're about, sorry, mate. About to turn 55.
That's right.
All right. I thought you said you're about to turn 56 or something. Okay. So, and obviously, if you just look at Shawn, for example, you can see that the shape he's in is insane. But also, you perform at a high, you perform at a high level as an athlete still. We talked about, just you're an athlete, right? Obviously, you basically live and breathe what you preach, right? You're a picture of health. That's the bottom line. What would you say to people are the big rocks to focus on when it comes to health, getting in shape? If you strip everything back, what are the important things to really focus on, Shawn? Just to wrap it up.
I mean, I can say that with some level of, experience behind me. I think, particularly younger, I mean, you would focus on lean mass and just getting stronger. I mean, I would do that. I would eat, a decent amount of protein, probably more than you're eating currently, and focus on that. And then I think, I think that just focus on what it means to be healthy. And I think, your definition of health is probably the right definition for you. And I think, for me, absence of pain, I think being able to function, all my systems are working well, makes sense. And so don't get hung up in minutia. I mean, it's very easy to get obsessed about what is my ketone level, or what's my average blood glucose, or what's my this or that lab, because there's always going to be new labs and ways to analyze stuff. But at the end of the day, focus on the important things. Am I happy? Do I wake up with a smile? Do I have energy? I mean, those are the things that really are going to make your quality of life better. And I think, if you spend your whole life trying to have a lab sheet where everything's in the green and you're obsessively doing that, your quality of life is probably going to be not what you would want. I mean, I think no one is going to lie back on their deathbed and say, wow, I wish my LDL cholesterol was 3 points lower than it was, or something. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. Enjoy life, focus on, true health. And I think strength training is an essential part of what you want to do. It's going to stead you well later on in life. If you can build up a strong base in your 20s and 30s, maybe in your 40s, those last 40 or 50 years are going to be a hell of a lot better for you.
Thanks a lot, Shawn. I really, really appreciate your time, mate. That was awesome. Some great knowledge bombs there for the audience, and it was good to hear a bit more about who you are and what
you're all about, Shawn. Thanks a lot, mate. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, buddy.